Hello guys, my name is Douglas Romão. I'm from Brazil. I'm an Office Apps and Services MVP. I work as a CCO and partner here at Tenant. We are basically a solution provider. We work with Office 365, Power Platform, and this kind of stuff for Brazil and for Europe as well. So I'll give you some more information, contact information, and feel free to reach me out. Today we are going to talk about how we can create multi-tenant based solutions using Microsoft Graph and Azure AD. So how we can register apps and then use them to deliver things between or using different tenants, and maybe create a services to provide for other customers, and then we can install things or deliver things in the customer tenant without any issues, and also considering security and everything else. So this is the subject of today. Just so we can start, I'll give you some more contact information, so feel free to reach me out here, send me a message on LinkedIn, Twitter, or check my blog. It's in Portuguese, my blog and my YouTube channel, but feel free to take a look there. It would be really nice to have some feedback from you guys, and if I can help in some way, just let me know, send me a message. I would love to discuss with you some different scenarios, different solutions and needs that you have. Okay, so let's start. I'm just putting some agenda here so we can so this can lead on us. So we'll discuss a little bit about Azure AD Apps, how this works, which scenario we can use, the authentication model of it, because it's important for us to understand the security part and how the authentication will work for Azure AD Apps and this multi-tenant stuff. Also a Microsoft Graph overview. So if you don't know Graph, I will show you a little bit. If you already know, we'll just discuss a little bit more which scenarios you can use that. And this is a really powerful tool, so it's good for us to know how to use the best way. Later on, a demo. I'll try to not be too theoretical here, just present some slides for you guys, and then later on we'll do a demo. Hopefully we'll work from the scratch here, and then I will show you a real use case of a multi-tenant solution architecture that I work with. That is a product that we use this whole multi-tenant stuff to deliver things for our customers. Okay, so let's start. What is the Azure AD Apps? Basically, the Azure AD Apps are applications that we register in our Azure AD, and then we can use this app to also register in the customer tenant. So if we develop a solution and we want to just deploy in the customer tenant and then use this app to access services like Azure resources or Office 365 stuff or Windows Intune or things like that, we can register this app on Azure, ask for permissions, use the authentication model, use the login on Microsoft using the Office 365 account, the Azure account, or a live account, and then with this setup we can actually use the services in Azure, use the services in Office 365 without any issues. Okay, we can configure permissions, we can do the single sign-on, and it's pretty simple to configure that. And it's a good thing because we can just set up a single application model or a single service that will consume other services in Azure in Office 365 without needing to deploy anything or the need to pay for another services for it. We can just register, ask for permissions, configure the permissions, and then use it, generating tokens and stuff. Okay, so to summarize, Azure AD Apps are apps that we register in our Azure AD, and we can use it to connect to other tenants or to use to access services in our tenant. Okay, and by services I mean Azure services, Office 365 services, Windows Intune, and things like that. Okay, I will show you in the Azure portal which services you can use. But that's it. It's a good thing because we have just one pattern of authentication, security, and stuff. Okay, so how is the authentication flow of these Azure AD apps? So as I said, we have basically one place that we register this app, that is our Azure, and then we can connect to Microsoft Graph or connect to other services in Azure and Office 365, basically asking for tokens. So the authentication flow is, I will ask for a token, this token will have an expiration date, security information there, which permissions this token have, and then also a refresh token, because we can use to ask for another token without having the whole redirection flow. And then this app will request this token, and then with this token we basically can use to consume the services in Azure or Office 365. Okay, so basically we have one identity, not only for our services that we have, like for our users in Office 365 and Azure, but we can also have an application identity, and then this application will use the same structure as we have for the users. So for example, we can log in to Azure and Office 365 using this app in the same way that the user has permissions to access, and then we can also use the on behalf flow to connect to the Azure services and Office 365 services using the user permissions. So if Douglas, I'm using the application, I can use the app to authenticate on behalf of Douglas and then ask for permissions or get the permissions that Douglas has to the services, and then request data or request some actions to do. Like we can ask for the persons who works in my team. So I can ask for a graph. Okay, Douglas is requesting, and the application will know that Douglas is requesting, and then will bring some data. And then if Douglas doesn't have access to a resource, this resource will be blocked because the application will use the user permission. Okay, so we have some authentication protocols for these Azure AD apps. We have all these 5. I'll just talk a little bit about all of them, but during the time, just to not be too theoretical. So we have all of these. Some of them will be an on behalf flow, so the application will do things on behalf of the user. Some of them will be the application doing things on behalf of the application, so as a assistant account between quotes. Some of them will be the user requests for tokens or for things to use. Some of them will be services consuming other services. So we have all these authentication protocols, and basically the differences between them will be the way that we will authenticate the user and the application, and which kind of permissions we will get. Okay, so we have some endpoints to use. This is pretty important because it's different depending on the way that you want to use this application. So if you want to use multi-tenant application, you have 2 ways to request, and the endpoints that I'm telling here is because we have basically the Azure AD apps, and all these authentication process are APIs, and then we can request the API to get the token. We can request the API to do something or to execute an action or something like that, and then to do that we need to use the endpoints that they have. And these 2 first ones, the organizations and the tenant, I just put it /tenant, but this is actually the name of the tenant, like trenting.onmicrosoft.com or something like that. And the organizations, both are for multi-tenant applications. So what is the difference? Basically, when we have a multi-tenant application, we need to tell to the application which tenant we are using. this authentication too. So if we are using multi-tenant app, I need to tell to the app, okay, you will connect to trentin.onmicrosoft.com or something like that. And if you want to just run an application that will run in your side, in your Azure, in your Office 365, you can just use /common. That will understand that it's a single tenant application and it's running in the same context. And we have basically two actions. One action is to ask for an authorization. Basically, this authorization is a consent thing. I will explain a little bit more further. And the other one is to request the token. So basically, I will show you guys the whole structure of this URL or this endpoint. But basically, the things that you need to know, because it's kind of tricky, it's this /organization or /tenant and the /common. And this endpoint will be used, one, to get an authorization to that tenant, to that service, and the other one to request for tokens. So the most used one is the /token here, because all the actions that you want to use this application for, you need to request a token. Everything will be based on a token. We will request a token, the token will be given for us, and then we use this token to do actions. Basically, that's it. And then if this token is expired, we can ask for another token, and then we're using the refresh token or something else, and then the token will be regenerated, and then we can use it again. So basically, this is the process that you need to know technically. Then we will use in a real case. So for app permissions, this is pretty important as well. So you have two types of permissions. One is the delegated ones, and the other one is the app permissions. So basically, the delegated permissions are permissions that we give for our apps that will use the user permission. So we will do stuff on behalf of the user. So this is the types of applications that we can use that. So we can create a single page app, we can create a web app, a mobile app, or an API. And these applications, these web applications or not, will connect to the Azure or connect to the Office 365 on behalf of the user. And this is an intersection between the delegated permissions that we are giving to the app. So, for example, we are giving permission to the app to get all the user profile information. This is one permission that we can give. Or we can give a permission for the app to get the list items in a SharePoint site using the user permissions. But also in SharePoint we have the user permissions. So if Douglas doesn't have permission to that list, even if I gave to the app, it doesn't work, because we are doing things on behalf of the user, and there is an intersection. We just use the permissions that are in both sides. Okay? This is pretty important to you to know, because this is the way that we set the permissions in the applications, and it's pretty important that you set the permissions in the right way. Not only because you access services, but also to make sure that your permissions is not crossing lines that you don't want. So this is pretty important to you to know, okay? So this is the effective permissions, as I said. In this case, as I said to you guys, the application here will be consented in the environment that the app will use. So in this case, we can consent, like I can consent some of the permissions that the app is asking. So the permission the app is requesting for accessing my user profile information, so I can give to the app, because it's not a whole thing, it's just my permissions. So I can give this permission without an IT guy or an administrator or something like that. So to be to have in mind some real here, it's when you want to, or when you are in an application, in a website, and they ask you to use the login using Microsoft account or something like that, or an Office 365 account, and you press the button sign in. basically what it does, it redirects you to the Azure app URL. It's a page to log in that page, and then when you log in, it's asking for a permission to you. And this ask for a permission, it's this consent, the user consent that it's telling here. We will do there in the demo, but just so you can understand a little bit, thinking more in a real use case, these applications that you press the button to log in using Microsoft account or something like that use exactly this way. Okay, and the other stuff as a service is the app only permissions. This is pretty important to you to know, because the app permissions are something that we will use the application permissions without any user interaction. So we can do stuff using the app permissions. So if we give to the app permissions to delete a site, and we ask for the token using the app only permissions, and then execute this information or execute this request with this token, the site will be deleted because the permissions are given to the app. So this is something that you need to be careful and take care closely, because it's something that you can cross a line that you don't want and make a breach in your security or something like that. And probably something that if you are creating a service that will deliver things for your customers using this process, your customer will ask for it. Will ask if you are giving permissions to the app to do stuff on behalf of the app, because here we don't have persons to point. It's just an app. Okay, so this is pretty important. This is a link for you guys to go to the consent and permissions page in Microsoft Docs. There is a whole page telling more about this consent process and the authentication process and everything else, and also the permissions that we'll talk a little bit more further. Okay, and for these app only permissions, the admin should consent. So we need to ask for a bunch of permissions, for app permissions, and then the administrator will consent. So even the delegated, we have some permissions that only the administrator can do, but in this case that is app permissions, we only have the administrator consenting this app, so, or this permission. So basically the admin should consent which permissions this app will have in that tenant. So to talk a little bit more about a real use case here, if you have an application and you want to access SharePoint lists or SharePoint content using Graph in a customer, and then you ask for permissions to access to all information in all site collections and everything else, the administrator will receive that and will ask for you, okay, do you really need permissions to read full information of all the sites or something like that? And if the administrator gives this consent, you will be able to get this information or manipulate this information depending on the permissions that you ask. So this is pretty important, not only for you that is creating an application, but also for you guys that are an IT guy or are responsible for an application or for your Azure or Office 365, to give the right permissions only for the applications that are that you have trust on. Okay, so how the permission works, and this is pretty important. You have basically three hierarchy stuff: the resource, the action, and the scope. Basically the resource is which service are you asking for the permission. So it could be mail for Outlook or for Exchange, files from SharePoint or OneDrive, the Office 365 user and groups information, so profile information, calendars, all the services that you have in Azure and Office 365 are available there. So you have Planner, you have Teams, you have a bunch of other stuff that you can ask. So the first one will be the entity, will be the resource. The second permission is the action. If it's read, if it's write, if it's read and write, if it's full control or something like that. So it's the action. And the third one it's not always that we have, but it's the scope, if it's shared or something like that. So the sample, just to give a sample for you, an example for you guys, user.read. This is asking for permission to read information or basic information from the user. And directory.readWrite.all is the permission to read and write all kinds of groups or directories in Office 365. So you have this resource action and scope, and this is important because when you are creating this Azure app, you need to configure which permissions this app will ask for, and which permissions this app will be given to do in the environment that will be installed or consented. Okay. Some scenarios that you can use this kind of stuff. So you can, for example, have a web API that integrates Office 365 and Azure services. So you want maybe to have a form in Office 365 that you fill up this form. This form will be will submit the information to a Flow or a Power Automate, and this Power Automate will get this information sent to an approval, and after that you want to create an Azure user or an Office 365 user with a license or something, like an onboarding process. This could be done using this whole structure and the Azure app. So you can have Power Platform's application connected, you can use PnP, you can create an SPA application in React or something like that, Angular or something like that, and use this application to not only log in and log out using Microsoft account, but also to connect to Office and Azure services. So it's pretty powerful, the things that you can do with the custom apps. So that's why it's so important to understand the custom apps, and also how is the difference between a single tenant app and also a multi-tenant app, because the multi-tenant apps are things that you can create as a package that can connect to different tenants and ask for permissions to a different tenant, and then you can have a service that connects to a bunch of customers, giving information, getting information, and deploying or delivering stuff. Okay, so this is some of the scenarios that you can use. So before, we had a way to develop things using these Azure apps. So we had the portal.azure.com. You could register from the apps.dev.microsoft.com, and we had the ADL and MSL SDKs to connect to use these authentication flows and everything else. You had two different endpoints to do stuff, and some of them could connect to Azure services, some of them could connect to on-premise stuff, some of them could connect to other services as Facebook or Google or LinkedIn or things like that. And then in the new way, we just have one place with one endpoint with basically two types, but you can still have one place or one way to do the things. So you can register in the portal.azure.com using the MSL as an SDK to authenticate and handle these tokens. So I will show how to do it manually, but you can use the SDKs to do it. And then you can connect to a hybrid environment. You can connect to Office and Azure accounts or live accounts, and also connect to business to customer applications as Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, or anything else. Okay, so it's a little bit more simpler than before. And Microsoft Graph, if you don't know, this is the way that we connect to Office 365 services. So you can connect to Office 365, Windows 10, and Enterprise Mobility and Security, and Dynamics 365 services. So we have a bunch of scenarios here where we can get the sites and lists, drives and files, identity management. So we can also get, for example, if I have a hybrid environment, and then we can have users that are local and users that are online, and then we need to make sure that they are synced, and then as someone is onboarding the company, we need to create the users there, give licenses, or remove licenses if the person was fired or something like that. You can do all these automations using Graph as the endpoints to do things, but also the Azure app to connect to these services and have only the permissions that you want and ask for the services that you want or the requests that you want. Okay, so it's pretty powerful. We can connect to everything. So the Data Connect is basically, we have some access. We have the Office 365 and Azure connected with a security environment. So we have a secure environment to go through the data and send the data to one place to another. And we can make sure that we have all the things in place so we can use big data, machine learning, or connect to other services. We can create a bot that do all this kind of stuff and requests for data or requests for information and actions using this whole thing. So we have one place to connect everything. Okay, so as I said, basically turning everything usable data sets. We have users, messages, calendar, events, mailbox settings, contacts, files, user information, tasks that we have in Planner, tasks that we have in To Do, everything in one place as a data source that we can use. And these apps and the multi-tenant solution or the single tenant solution, it's here for us to make sure that we can connect to all this data or all these services and request to actions, making sure that our app has only permissions to do things that we want, that we can manage this, and we can make sure that the permissions that we are asking and giving are right. So this is it's a good way to manage one service that is connected to other services and make sure that it's centralized and manageable. Okay, so what is multi-tenant? I just said a lot of times here, but basically solutions that will run or connect to different environments. So we can create one solution that will be hosted in my tenant, and then this solution will connect to different tenants, ask for permissions, ask for actions. So I can create, for example, a product that it's a SaaS product, so the user will have a license to use or something like that, and this application will have permissions to access the customer environment and then get the user information, gathering this information and giving a big data or give a machine learning action there to understand the data or something else. And then you can have this kind of stuff using one application connecting to multi places. Okay? And the difference between the multi-tenant and the single-tenant application is that when you create a single-tenant application, it will be registered, hosted, and will run in a context that it's installed. So we will create one application, register, ask for permissions, and this application will run only in my tenant, only in my context. And the multi-tenant solution, it's something that we register, create, and then we can use for our environment, our context, but also to connect to other tenants, ask for permissions, and do stuff there. Okay, this is pretty much the difference between the multi-tenant and the single tenant applications. Okay, so then I'll just do some demo here right now. So basically I'm in the portal.azure.com. Let me just open the Zoom it here so I can zoom it a little bit. So if you go to the Azure portal.azure.com, you have two things related to apps. So it's good for us to understand the difference between them so you can create your own here. Okay, so in the Azure portal we have the app registration menu and we have the enterprise applications menu. Basically, the difference is that the app registrations are applications that are registered in my environment. So I created the app. Even if it's a multi-tenant application, it's something that I created and it's hosted in my environment. Okay? And then we have the enterprise applications. What is that? The enterprise applications are applications that we gave permissions. If it is an application that someone created in a tenant and give permissions here, or asked permissions and I gave, or other applications as Facebook, as LinkedIn, as Google, as other Twitter, or other applications that you use connected with your account. So the enterprise applications will be stored here or hosted here, and it's basically a registration that we do here. We give permissions and everything else in our services, and the app registration are the apps that we created. Okay, so I will open the enterprise applications just to show you guys the differences. So we can see here all the applications that we gave permissions. So we have common data services, we have Teams, we have LinkedIn, we have an app that I created and gave permissions, the Office 365 Exchange Online API, Management API, SharePoint Online. So all the applications that are ours or not are here. So if I gave permissions to an application, will be stored here, and I can also click on one of these applications and then check for the permissions that I gave to this application. And if I want, I can also remove the permissions or revoke the permissions. Okay, I can see here which permissions I gave to this application. So I gave permissions to sign in and read the user profile, create groups, have full control of all site collections. I can see which type of permission I gave, if it's delegated or application, how was granted, if it was an admin consent or user consent. So here is, if you are an IT guy and then Douglas asked you to consent an app, and then you are not really understanding what is going on, you can consent, and then you can get here to the app permissions, and then I just want to review these permissions. I think something is not right, so I can review, I can remove, I can say that it's malicious or I'm compromised or something else, and then you can revoke the permissions of this application. So this is good, because if you are a service provider, a solution provider, and then a customer is asking for you, why I need to give your permissions, and then you give permissions, and then you can say, if for some reason you are not trusting on it, you can, and if the contract is broken or something like that, you can just revoke the permissions and everything is fine. We will not have access anymore to your data or to your services. So this is pretty fine, and this is a good thing, because the customer or the IT of the customer will see, because the register is in the tenant, so we can keep the governance and the security manageable. Okay, so this is a good stuff. So here you can see, I will not take any part of this more, because there's a lot of things to say here, but you can manage the audit logs, the activity insights. If some of these application it's taking more time or using more resources that you want, you can check all of that. Okay, and if I go home again, I can go to app registrations and then see all the applications that I have here. And I have one application that I created just for testing purposes. I will show you later, but we will create a new application so you can see how you can register an app, a single or a multi-tenant app, and then how you can configure, or how are the steps that you need to do to make sure that your app is prepared to be used in all the places. Okay. So I'll just click on new registration, and then here is one of the important parts, this screen changed a lot if you are used to it. Basically, a few months or a year ago, the page was pretty different from this. But now, basically, you need to take care of some of the stuff when you are creating an app. You need to create a name for this app. You can change later, no problem. So this is only for you and your customer. When your customer is consenting to the app, the name will be displayed for the customer, telling, okay, Douglas app, it's requesting permissions to access your user profile data or something like that. So the name is pretty important in this case. And then the support accounted type. So your application will be single tenant. It means that the account in this organization directly only. This application will run only in this tenant, in this context. That's why it's also displaying the name. So it's the name of my tenant here. So this is a single tenant application, so it will generate or runs only in this context. This is default. The other one is, it's a multi-tenant app. It means that it's an application that will run in different Azure AD directories or not. So this is the multi-tenant. And also you can configure to be an Azure AD directory. It means that we'll use an Office 365 or Azure user, or also a Microsoft account like Live or Skype or something like that. So you have these supported accounted types. So basically it means that your app will handle only users from this context or from this tenant, will handle, this is the first option. The second option, your app, the authentication will handle users from different tenants, or in the third way, from different tenants and also live accounts or Skype or Xbox accounts. Okay, so you just need to think in the way that you need to create this thing to make sure that your app is registered in the right way. And the last part is the redirect URL. This is just an URL that when we are asking for consent or we are asking for a token, we can have a redirect URL that we are basically, the authentication flow will be, we will be redirected to the login page in Microsoft, the normal login page that you have, that the user have, and also if the user is already logged in, it basically just go through because it's a single sign-on thing, and then it will redirect you or the user to this redirect URL. So if you have a web application that you want to go to, click in the login button, go to the login process, and then go back to a page to render the token and everything else, you need to put a redirect URL here. So this is for the cases that you want to go through the login page and go back to your application to do something. Okay, so this is something that you can create later, no problem. So we are just creating a testing app 2. I'll click in register, and this will create an app for us. Basically the app is created, pretty simple. We don't have to do anything else. One important thing, the application ID. This is the ID of the application that we have to basically connect to the stuff, get the data, get the token, and do everything else. The application ID is pretty important. Okay, so you need to be careful of it, and you need to get this application ID and store in a secure place. Because with the ID and the secret, you can do everything. You can request a token and do everything that the application or the app have permission to do. Okay. So one other important thing is the certificate or the client secret. So we have the client ID that I mentioned to you. The other stuff is the client secret. So we can go to certificate and secrets, and we have two types of secrets that we can have to use to connect to our application or request a token. We can register a secret it means that we'll create a secret for us, and then we can combine it, the ID and the secret, to ask tokens, or we can use a trusted certificate, so we can assign it certificate. So we can basically generate a certificate and then upload here, and then we can use this certificate as security for connecting or asking for the token and everything else for our app. The certificates are more secure than the class secret, but you can also generate both, no problem. You just need to decide which one to use. Basically, the secret you can assign when it expires, or if never expires. And here in the certificate, if you want a setup that it's just to give an example, if you want a setup that it's more secure, you could have an Azure Key Vault, for example, store your certificate information there, and then use the certificate here just to connect to stuff and make sure that your app is secured to connect to your customer services. Okay, so this is important. I will just generate a secret here to give an example. One important thing is, when you create a secret, you need to store this in somewhere, because if you go out to this page, your secret will be gone. So this is important to notice and to copy. And also, one other important thing is, when you are requesting for tokens, you can see that here we have a bunch of different characters or weird characters, and then, or special characters, and then that you can use that, but you need to encode in some cases too, because it's a HTTP request to get the token and everything else. So this is a tricky part that you need to be aware of. So one other thing is the permissions. This is the most important part, because here you will be able to configure which permissions your application will have or will ask in the customer tenant, or in your tenant, sorry. And then you can click in add permissions, and then you can select all of these permissions. So you can have access to Azure Right Management Services, Azure Service Management, Flow Services, Office 365 Management APIs, SharePoint, Intune, Graph. So you have a lot of different services, as I said in the beginning, that you can configure your app to have access to. So you can select, for example, Graph, and then you will have the delegated and the application permissions, as I mentioned. Delegated for user, application for app only. Okay, so you can select which permissions you want to give. I can select for application, and then I have a bunch of services that I can ask for permissions. So I can ask for permissions to read mails or to send mails or something like that, for people information, reports, the organization information, meetings, and everything else. So we have a bunch of services that we can select here. I can select, for example, user, and then I can have, for example, permissions to read all user profiles. So if I want to create a search people in my application, I create an application that will give all the birthdays or something like that, or a handbook or something, you can create asking for this kind of permissions. So as I said, or as I mentioned before, we have the resource, we have which permissions or we are asking for, and then the scope. So we have this structure, and if you want, you can see the description of this permission just to know what it is. Okay, so this is pretty important, just so you can select which permissions you want, and then make sure that the permissions that you are asking for your app are the right permissions, and the permissions that you are giving to other apps are the right permissions. Okay, so this is pretty important, so take care of it, be careful. Okay, so you can just select, add the permission, and then I just created my app. So that's it. We don't have to do anything else. I can show you guys the manifest. this application has basically a JSON structure with the configuration. All the informations are here. So you have the app ID information, you have the protocol that I mentioned, if we use the implicit flow or not, if we allow the implicit flow or not, the key that was generated, so which audience will be, if will be Azure AD multiple tenant or not, who is the publisher, and everything else. So you can have just so you can see the application information here, you can go to manifest and see. Okay, so that's it. We have more configuration. We can create a logo for it, so you can, when you see in the application, in the enterprise applications, you can see a custom logo for your application and everything else. So you have this kind of stuff, and it's kind of easy to just use it. Okay, and you have other permissions that you can see later. Okay, so I will go back to my testing app. This app just have permission to the user read information, and then I'm gonna show you how you can explore this kind of stuff, or you can ask for permissions, and then how this works for real, and then how the permissions you can change a little bit. So we have one tenant here. This is a demo tenant. I just created an URL. This URL is the consent URL. I'm gonna send you guys later on, but it's basically asking for the tenant. If it's a multi-tenant, as I said, it should be the tenant ref or /organizations. And also we have the client ID, the redirect URL, and also the scope that I'm asking for the graph. So this is when I'm asking for consent from my app in a customer tenant. So I can just copy this URL as I'm showing here. I can have the tenant ref, the scope, the redirect URL that I'm just pointing to localhost, and the ID of the app. Okay, I'll get this URL, and then I'm gonna go to another tenant that I have here, that it's another demo tenant, and then I'll paste. I can create a page that when we click into the login or signing for the customer, it will redirect to this page for the customer. It's asking for the admin consent here, and this is the page that my application is asking for permission. So permission requested, so which application is asking this permission, and which permissions we are asking for. Okay, so this is one thing that we can do. So we can have here the which permissions we are asking, and all the permissions will be displayed here. And just so you can see how it works, we can change the permissions here. So I will ask more permissions for example, SharePoint, and then I'll ask for full control in all sites. So it's telling that it's not granted for Contoso. Contoso is this environment that we have here. So it's not granted in our environment yet, but we can just consent it here. And then if I get the same URL and then open again in the other tenant as the customer tenant, I can see that now we have more permissions that we are asking. So this is one important part, that if we are asking for permissions and then we need to change for some reason, we need to ask again for the customer to consent it, if we need to change the permissions or give more or less. Okay, so once we accept, it's telling that okay, this app is registered in our environment. So if I open the portal.azure.com here, and then if I go to enterprise applications, I can go to enterprise applications, I will see the testing app here. So I have testing here. Okay, so it's basically registered as another application in my tenant or in this customer tenant, for example. Okay, so just a quick example of how we can ask for a token and how this token works. I just created a flow here, a Power Automate here, that it's getting the client secret. This is the client secret, and then it's using the token endpoint. If you remember, I said that we have the auth endpoint and the token endpoint, and basically this token, it's asking for, it's one of the grant type here, it's client credentials, so we are using the client ID and the client secret and which resource we are asking for permissions. So if I run this flow here, I will basically ask for a token, and then this is basically an HTTP request. If we have an Angular or a React or a Node.js or a .NET Core application, we can just do the same thing. It's just an HTTP request, is a post that we are doing for the tenant that we want to use. So if I went to this is the tenant of the customer between quotes, so it's our customer here, and then we are asking for a token to do things in this customer, and this is the response. We have the when it expires, which resource we are asking for permission, and this is the access token. And with this access token we can do things. We can request for the user information, we can request for the user profile data, the emails from this user, the SharePoint list, and everything else. So basically this is a process of when we are requesting an app only permissions. If you have, or if you want to do things on behalf of the user, you need to go through that flow of going to the login page, the user will log in, we will get back the token, and then we can use this token, but the principle is the same. If it's an application, an app only permission, we can request this token without doing anything, without doing a redirection, a login page, because it's an application, and then we can just request and get this token and use it. This has an expiration date and doesn't have a refresh token because it's something that you will use at some times, not all the time, so you don't have to refresh, you just ask again. And if it's a user thing, or you want to do things on behalf of the user, the application needs to refresh the token, then ask the token again, and then use this token. And then the principle is the same because you will always use the token to request. So the requirement to ask for graph, it's a token. The requirement to ask for an Azure API thing, it's a token. So you need to have this token. It's a JWT token. It's simple. It's a standard. There is a pattern for it, so it's secure, and then you'll have trust to use it in your customers. Okay. So just so you can see, if you go to Graph Explorer, it's developer.microsoft.com/graph/graph-explorer. You can test some of the endpoints that you can use in the Graph API, and then you can ask for a token as I did in Power Automate here, and then with this token do things against Graph, against Azure service, just by giving the permission, the right permission, trying this thing to consent the application in other tenants, so you can create 2 tenants and then use this structure to test this whole thing, this whole services. Okay, this is just an overview, a quick overview about it. I just have one more thing to tell about it's the interactive. This is a product that I'm working for the past two years. It's basically an intranet product based on SharePoint, and then we use this structure, this multi-tenant structure or infrastructure or architecture, to deploy things or to access things and to give to our customers a way to use our product and have or use the updates and have these updates very often by using our service. So we use this service to connect to their tenants and deploy stuff, and our application to ask tokens on behalf of their users and then interact with data and everything else. In a secure way, we don't have access to their environment, they just consented, and then we have the permissions that they gave to us. So this is pretty nice, and it's a real case that you can search a little bit more if you want. Okay, so I hope you guys liked it, this session. If you have any questions, just let me know, just ping me on LinkedIn and everything else. You have my email as well. Just send me a contact if you have a scenario that you are facing problems. We had a lot of issues that we solved during these 2 years, so I can help. So yeah, and hope you guys have a great day and that you enjoyed this session, and feel free to reach me out, and hopefully we'll have more sessions more deeply and everything else related to that. Okay, so thank you for your time and see you next time.